yesterday a report came that mentioned the $1 trillion requirement, but they said that only market mechanism can fulfill this demand. And other side, we have seen that the climate debt is also increasing. So what is your stand regarding grant and the market mechanism?
All right, thank you. Yeah, we can give the mic to her and then we'll finish with a gentleman over there for this round. Thank you.
Hi, Attract Mooney from the FT. You said you're here to defend the Paris Agreement, but we have had noises that Argentina will leave the Paris Agreement, and Trump has obviously made also noises that he will leave the Paris Agreement. How worrying is it for you guys that there is this kind of noise rumbling at the moment?
All right, finally here, this round. Please pass on the mic to a colleague here. Thank you.
Hi, Josh Gabatis from Carbon Brief. Do the LDCs and AOSIS disagree in principle with the idea of a sort of multi-layered goal which includes lots of private finance if there is a kind of solid
to respond to those questions? Should there be some more? We'll see how far we can go. Let me start with AOSIS. You have the floor.
Thanks for the questions. First, on the contributor base and expansion, that's an unequivocal no. Minister highlighted that there's great importance of us following the Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. It's quite clear on who is obligated to provide, and any sort of deviation from who is clearly articulated in the Paris Agreement to provide would then open up certain things. So it would open up the entire Paris Agreement, actually. So think about the 1.5 goal that Minister was just alluding to. If we can now change the contributors as outlined in the Paris Agreement, does that mean we can now change 1.5 because they're seeing different aspects of where we're going as a trajectory? It's extremely dangerous, and so we want to keep to the tenor of what the Paris Agreement is saying on who is obligated to provide. As it relates to the COP process not working, I haven't seen the letter in detail, but what would I say generally about the UNFCCC and what it means to us as small and developing states, as well as least developed countries, I assume, but I won't speak on their behalf, is that other spaces where things are discussed in the context of climate change, where we're seeing a lot more prominence being placed on climate finance, for example, the Group of 20, we're not a part of that. We are not a part of those discussions. And so it's extremely important for forums like the UNFCCC to continue to exist and to continue to be legitimate. So you have the G20 over in one corner, you have the BRICS over in another corner, and we're seeing persons going to these different other corners as opposed to the legitimate corners where all of us can be around the table. So while others may have their criticisms of the COP process, it's extremely important for us because that is the only time that our voice can be clearly heard. So we hope that they can appreciate that, even though that they may have been, as you alluded to, I think, former heads of this entire process. We hope to continue to make sure that the COP process is as efficient as possible. To the colleague in the burgundy jacket, I think you were alluding to the Stern report and the trillion that he was talking about. I actually mentioned this yesterday in kind of another discussion. It's quite interesting that there's a lot of emphasis being placed on a report by Lord Stern, who also, from my understanding, was one of the architects of the 100 billion. And actually, from my understanding, his splitting between the 100 billion of what would be provision, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and fact check, but I'm not too certain, but it was, for example, half going to public core and half going to mobilization. However, the 100 billion is currently an 85% split to provision and a 15% split to the mobilization aspects. Mobilization is really hard to guarantee. And this is why SIDS and LDCs have been calling for their minimum allocation floor, 39 per year for SIDS, 220 billion for LDCs per year as well in grant equivalent terms, being linked to the provision goal, not the mobilization goal, because we're very much so, if provision is uncertain, mobilization is even more uncertain. So that's why we need to focus on having a clear understanding of and the importance of public provisioning. And so while we appreciate that Lord Stern is quite an astute economist in the space, fool me once, shame on you, and fool me twice, right? So then, as it relates to the next one on Argentina and the US leaving the Paris Agreement, I do think that question is an interesting kind of question where, in the context of how we've been looking at it as SIDS and LDCs, is in a joint proposal that we've made, in addition to our minimum allocation floors, we've asked an invitation to the COP, so the UNFCCC itself, to reaffirm the goal in the context of the broader UNFCCC. So that will then, if you do leave the Paris Agreement, that doesn't then allow you to continue to be around the process and not be committed to the goal that others are making, right? And this is in the best interest of not only developing countries, but developed countries, because I do not see Europe being in a similar position that they were in when the US left the first time, to kind of plug that gap as well. So it's in the best interest of all to make sure that there's also, if you stay in the convention, that you continue to be committed to the new goal under the convention as well. And then the last thing is on the multi-layer question, and how we view it. We view it again in line with what the Minister was saying about Article 9, and Article 9 of the Paris Agreement being our guide. There is no mention to investments in the context of the Paris Agreement. And so we need to be very careful when we open up this scope to investments. Which investments are you talking about? Are you talking about public? Are you talking about international, private, public? There's no, if you look at the options right now, it's all over the place. Right now, we need to be focused on what we agreed to in Paris, which is about providing support to developing countries. If we have a discussion on investments, that has to be sometime after we have clearly agreed to this goal. So we shouldn't be mixing up the different aspects as it relates to these layers. And so AOSIS and LDCs is primarily focused on the provision and mobilization structure that we've had. So
Okay.
I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Mekai, just to refresh, Mekai is the lead negotiator for the AOSIS group, and that's on the matters of finance. LDC?
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks to the leaders, AOSIS and LDCs. I will pick only one of the questions regarding the thought about the contribution, the sources into the NCQG, the new goal. As was, I think, raised by in the last question. So our position is that the new goal, I think this reflects on the multi-layer approach that you mentioned, is that the new goal should largely be supported by public finance, because this is what is the commitment of the developed countries to mobilize and provide, as my colleague Mikai has presented. And therefore, we need public finance that will come in form of grant money to support adaptation and loss and damage as much as we can, because adaptation is the priority and we cannot afford to support adaptation from loans. We did a mathematical assessment in a way, and as LDCs, also together with the AOSIS, we had presented to the co-chairs that at least if we got up to 70% of the mobilization and provision into and out of the new goal should come from public financing. And about approximately maybe 20% of that total should flow through the financial mechanism. This is to give us guarantee, a level of guarantee that we will get the resources, because we cannot afford to go for loans, guarantees, and the other sources. Then the other layer can come from the other sources to support investments, as our colleagues are presenting from the other side. So this is the multi-layered approach that we are looking at, and this is only two, and we have presented this even until the pre-COP when we met here last month. Thank you. I hope this addresses your concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll just take one last burning question and then we can close. Yeah, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, just another question on the Stern report, Jake Biddle from GRIST. In the estimate of need in 2030, the report estimates that about 2/3 of the need will be for mitigation and about 10 to 15% will be for adaptation and loss and damage, respectively. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on those numbers and where, percentages might want to land in the NCQG negotiations. Thank you.
Can we respond to that? You want to start?
Yeah,
okay.
And thanks for the question. Again, typically, especially those numbers are quite biased on the input and the data and the information that they can have of understanding costed needs. And so we just have more figures in the context of mitigation as opposed to adaptation and loss and damage. It also does not value the fact that when you're looking at non-economically valued issues like cultural heritage, health, all of these other aspects, economists are really bad at valuing that, right? And the needs to, I guess, respond to that and sort of make those systems resilient. That doesn't mean that they don't need the type of financing. And so as UNFCCC, we do need to make sure that in this support goal, primarily about public financing, is that we use public financing where private financing especially cannot go, and don't seek to venture in, which is adaptation, but most definitely for responding and addressing to loss and damage.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Not too sure if Evans, you want to respond to that, or we can. You're comfortable. Thank you. All right, so colleagues, that's the end of our engagement this morning. We'd like to appreciate you for coming and wish you well in Baku. We'll see you around. If you want one-on-one interviews, we're here to facilitate, and there is Andy over there, my colleague. You can also reach out to him on behalf of the AOSIS. Thank you, Minister Shastam, Mekai, Dr. Nkungula, and Evans. Let's have a good day. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, my name is Matthews Malata, your moderator. Thank you.